Hey folks, Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and I don't know if I've been back here quite yet recording one of these videos. I mean, we got back here a couple weeks ago, but I suspect I have not actually recorded a video since being back. So welcome back to our humble Michigan abode where I will be for exactly one more of these, and then we're off to Arizona. Um, while I'm here, I am trying to attend to some personal business. For instance, getting a haircut and a beard trim. So you are catching me at peak lumberjack, if you will, which I imagine everybody can appreciate. But now on to the question, which this week is, let me see if I'm reading this right. What is your worst experience working with a client? So I feel a little bit retroactively justified in talking about myself because this is actually a question about me, which I don't get a whole lot of or do a whole lot of. I must not be that interesting a person, but I will answer this one. And the answer is maybe weirdly unsatisfying. Like if you were hoping I was going to queue up some just like horrific story about a client, I don't know what my worst experience working with a client is. I don't really have much prepared. I made a couple of hasty notes before this call, but really it was kind of more like, what don't I like about working with clients? But if you go on, like, there's a site that used to exist. I don't know if it still does, like Clients from Hell. You might see just like these epic stories there, like you did work for somebody for half a year and they never paid you, or like, I don't know, lawsuits or whatever happens to people, and just like knock wood, but that really hasn't happened to me. And I include the work with Hit Subscribe, which isn't just me as an indie anymore. It's a surprisingly large now organization. But we have a lot of clients with Hit Subscribe, maybe something like 40 or 50 these days. I'm not exactly sure how many. Sure, exactly sure. I'm not going to edit this later. You're just going to have to live with that nonsense. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly how many, but that's a lot of clients. And I think we actually recently just had maybe our 100th historical client. I don't remember. That's a lot with Hit Subscribe alone. And then there's all my consulting clients, and I don't know how many that is over the years. So you would think I would have had a pretty bad story, but the reality is no, there have been bad things, like sleepless nights or unpleasant interactions or firing clients. I wonder if I've ever been fired by I don't think so. Uh, we've certainly like mutually parted ways or whatever. But anyway, there have been things that have happened, unpleasant things, late payments, mind-numbing interactions, etc. But nothing really stands out as a singularly bad client experience. I like to think it's because people are essentially mostly decent, but I also think there's a lot that I do, both with our business these days and over the years as an indie, that kind of inoculates against really memorable blowups. So I was thinking maybe I'd spend the first part of this stream talking about what I do that I think prevents this kind of thing, and then maybe go through what I've learned over the years to disqualify in terms of clients or prospects to keep my aggravation level at a relative minimum. So why don't I have any horror stories? I guess the first thing I'll say is I am actually a financially fairly conservative person. Like, I'm somewhat risk averse. So when freelancing in the beginning, for a long time, I did it as a moonlighter when I had a day job, so I didn't need any given piece of business. And then even when I went off on my own, I had built a fair bit of runway. So I went off on my own with the knowledge that I would be okay if things didn't shape up for a while. I also took my employer at the time and boomeranged that employer into a consulting client. And at the time, I was doing a fair bit of video work for Pluralsight and I think occasional other freelance things. So when I left the corporate world, I actually had some good runway and a number of things already lined up. And ever since that time, I've, if anything, always just kind of de-risked. So what I'm saying is I've never opened myself up to much risk in any given incremental thing that I was taking on. I never really desperately needed a gig to pay the mortgage or anything like that. So approaching things that way means that I can be fairly discerning when it comes to taking on business. And in general, I might say that, like, I've pretty much always structured things so that I never need any particular piece of business. And this actually has come along for the ride with Hit Subscribe. So if you are starting an agency, like a service-based business, by the way, video for another time, but I very much resist thinking of or calling Hit Subscribe an agency. I do not think that is what we are, but it is what people would call us. And if you are starting an agency or more broadly a services-based business, a good piece of wisdom that I would recommend is never let any client in your book of business be responsible for more than 20% of your revenue. That means that even on the worst day of somebody blowing something up, you're only losing 20% of your income. And if you get down even below that in a services-based business, you're in great shape. So I don't know what any given client accounts for in Hit Subscribe's revenue, for instance, but I'd be shocked if it were more than 15%. So there's just no one client that's that big of a risk if you were to lose them. So anyway, my point with all this is if you adopt a philosophy like that going in with your practice, you can put yourself in a position where you never need any particular piece of business. And that sort of limits the damage of any horror story. So if you have a situation where you don't actually need any given piece of business and you show up to the client site one day and you've got I don't know, your client contact is drunk and starts swearing at you or something, you can just leave. So that might be a horrible story, and I'll, maybe get to some stories here in a moment if they pop into my head, but it won't be a nightmare client because it just won't be a client after they do that. You just, hey, I don't need this. Here's your money back. Bye. Oh, that's another one. Over the years, I have generally front-loaded cash flow, both as an indie and then with Hit Subscribe. We invoice everything up front. So this is good for cash flow and it's good for keeping your risk at a minimum, but I would almost anything you're paid by a client, think of holding it in escrow, let's say, so that you should always be prepared. And this is something I've done over the years to essentially open the gate and be like, here's all your money back. Bye. If you do that, if you keep your risk profile low and you always make yourself liquid enough to just issue a refund check and say, I don't need this. Number one, you will be a lot less subject to horror stories. And number two, you would be surprised at how well that bit of reverse psychology works. People are generally used to a fairly predictable paradigm, whether it's employer, employee, or client and vendor. Is the client hires and you put up with things, the employer hires and you put up with things. People aren't used to being fired by vendors. Often that will result in a bit of jujitsu where they're like, whoa, I don't want all my money back. Let's, and then suddenly you've kind of reset the power dynamic in that relationship. I don't really like playing games. And indeed, kind of paradoxically, I don't think that works. If you're playing a game, you have to actually be walking away and then the things invert. And this also tends to discourage horror stories. And in general, I have maintained that position and posture throughout the last 10 years of indie-ish work. Well, I guess 12 years if you count moonlighting. I don't know. Which is I've always been willing to blow up anything I take on. Not that I want to. I want money. I want the business to grow. Whoa, things are getting wild out there with a toddler. If you can hear that, my wife is desperately trying to keep him quiet, which I appreciate. So it's not that I don't want these things. I want things to succeed. I want business. I want to help clients. But you should always be prepared that any given thing you're taking on could go sideways and have contingency plans for that. And then you won't need to deal with nightmares because life is kind of too short for that. And then finally, another thing I've always done pretty well is right from the outset, since I never needed the business all that much, I was always really picky in discovery. So I tended to ask a lot of, and to this day, I'm actually starting to do a new flavor of sales with Hit Subscribe as we expand our custom operations. I'm pretty picky about what we take on, ask a lot of disqualifying questions. So if somebody comes into your orbit, why are you reaching out to me? What have you tried already? Why not just do that? You kind of make it clear that they're coming to you for a reason. You do things like, are you running an RFP? And then if they are, say, I don't really want this business. I'm not interested in competing for your business. So if you ask a lot of questions in discovery and kind of almost get them to sort of semi-disqualify themselves, or at least work to it to 10 where they're like, no, I really think it's kind of only you that can do this. You put yourself in a pretty strong position to be taking on work where there's something unique about you that you can deliver, and that kind of eliminates a lot of the games too, and it positions you to look for red flags during discovery. So If somebody is in fact running an RFP, for instance, you can say something like, well, I want to be involved strategically. And if you're running an RFP, the strategy is long decided. You're just looking for labor. So that if you decide I want to be involved in strategy engagements and you have a way to disqualify people that are not looking for strategy, that's another great thing to be able to do. You could also identify your interaction red flags. So if somebody's, rude, or if they show up 20 minutes late for a discovery call, you can just say like, look, this is not likely to be a great fit if you don't, you know, if somebody is, putting their worst foot forward in that way by showing up 20 minutes late to a discovery call, there's a pretty good chance they're not going to like grow more respect for you throughout the course of that engagement. So just, hey, life is too short, and never mind, I'm busy, I'm booked out, whatever. So that's also, just having a sense. I say to freelancers a lot, if your spider sense is telling you during a discovery call that this is not going to be good, run away. Don't second guess that. Just, make excuses. It turns out I'm busy. Ooh, sorry. One of my best old clients came along. I just can't do this right now. So that's been a big one. And then I guess, not to channel Jonathan Stark here too much because I'm on his daily mailing list and I see these sorts of things. But like another big one that I think has resulted in a lack of horror stories is nothing produces horror stories like time and materials or hourly billing, because you are essentially putting all the risk back onto a client. Usually you're being paid in arrears, and you're being judged based on how you spend your hours. And hourly billing essentially creates an adversarial relationship with your clients. It's a zero sum game, and you're not partnering on an outcome and aligning your incentives. Instead, you are sitting across the negotiating table trying to claim a higher rate, arguing about scope and putting all the risk on them. So I don't want to belabor this point, but I can't tell you, early in my career, I did time and materials engagements, and mostly they went fine. I mean, it wasn't the worst thing. But the more and more that I flipped over to flat pricing things, so much of the crap that comes along with hourly billing just goes away. If a vendor were quoting time and materials to me, like lawyers or whoever does this kind of crap, you bet I am micromanaging their time. Why did you spend time on that? I didn't tell you to spend time on that. Actually, clients aside, one of my worst vendor interactions is with a lawyer that was sending me bills for stuff I never even asked for because, sorry, I misunderstood you, but I did the work, like some kind of child. And that sort of infantile thing is what hourly billing invites. Your clients will be looking at your timesheet and saying, did you really need to spend 3 hours setting up your IDE? And suddenly you're justifying, well, it's important to me that I do blah, blah, blah with my tools. Well, why did you bill me for that? So right out of the gate, you're, arguing over minutia. So if you flat, or better yet, value price your engagements, all those arguments go away. You're agreeing on a goal, and the sooner you get to that goal and collect your money, the happier the client is. And I can't tell you how much that tends to set you up. That's actually one I've taken for granted. It's it's got to be 5 years since I've ever done. The last thing I did time and materials was kind of forced on me because I got into this pool for like expert witness testimony on code quality, and I didn't actually do any engagements, but they had to have an hourly rate because you were, going into court and lawyers are paying you out. But I think since then, 2017, I don't think I've ever quoted anything hourly, and I would never look back. And I tell our clients, I will never quote you things time and materials. If a subcontractor does that, we will absorb the unpleasantness of this, manage it, and make your experience pleasant. And hey, clients like that. People like knowing the price of things when they buy it, rather than just saying, well, I don't know what it's going to cost you. I'm just going to poke a hole in your wallet and run along until the money runs out or you sue me or something. So again, I don't mean to get on my soapbox, but if you have always billed time and materials, you would be shocked at how much better an experience it is for everybody if you flat price. So those are some of the things I've done to kind of ensure not having horror stories almost by accident in the beginning, and relying heavily on just not needing the business, but learning what makes things go well and not go well over the years, and then flipping and doing that deliberately has been important. I guess I can say not so much what has made things a horror story or any particular client, but like some of the things that I don't like, and maybe you wouldn't like either. A big one for me is hair on fire clients. So I have deliberately, I don't know if anybody watching is familiar with like the Eisenhower quadrants. urgent or not urgent, and like important or unimportant. And you kind of like have four quadrants if either one of those can be a binary. And I deliberately worked my way into the important but not urgent quadrant, which is really what digital marketing it is. There is, I like to say to the folks that hit subscribe and our clients in general, and I hope the clients agree with this, but there's really no such thing as a blog post emergency. And if you think that there is a blog post emergency, um, and I mean not emergency in the sense there are things that can go critically wrong with blog posts that actually create a lot of risk, but I mean a time emergency. You don't desperately need a blog post up on your site 2 hours from now versus three. And if a client thinks that, it's probably not a piece of business I want, which might sound harsh, but like, again, it comes back to the life is too short conversation. Like, if hair on fire clients raise your stress level, so you would want to look for relatively easygoing clients, or if there is something urgent that comes up, that you would want to trust it's actually urgent rather than this is just a person steeped in a culture where everything's an emergency and banging on people and I don't know, getting angry or whatever gets things done faster. So I probably had some horror stories like that over the years, but usually, I mean, I'm pretty decent about boundaries. If it comes to something like that, I generally will kind of do what they want that one time and say, okay, this seems like it's really important to you. Let's get it done. But I don't operate this way. So in the future, can you control yourself when it comes to this sort of thing? Or maybe you ought to look for somebody else, because I'm not answering any more Saturday afternoon phone calls about blog posts. It's just not happening. So let's either structure this engagement so you don't make those calls anymore, or go find somebody that will answer the phone. So hair on fire clients is a big one that I don't like. It's hard to remember specifics. I mean, if anybody thinking back can probably, think of times that this has happened, but rude or insulting people would be a big one. I mean, this is just a categorical immediate firing for me. And I've done this before over the years. Usually, you can detect something like this during discovery or soon after and just avoid it. But, more recently, I can think maybe last time this happened was like 3 years ago. There was a client or a person that kind of lost their temper and was, in my opinion, abusive to staff. And I just reached out and said, here's all your money back. Bye. We just don't tolerate this kind of behavior. And that was that. And the person was actually pretty gracious about it. Like, I expected that was going to go sideways. So that was interesting. But once or twice this has come up, and it's just not something like, again, a lot of this is down to life's too short. And, if I had a different set of policies as I'm thinking about this, then this might be an ultimate client horror story that I was telling you about. Because if I had just said like, oh my goodness, I'm really sorry. I hope you stop insulting me. Let's keep working together. Then resentment would build, and you would start to hate your life. And you have this client who you need their money, but they're abusing you. Like, I think it's a lot of the policies I mentioned earlier on in this video that have made these just like quirky things that have happened instead of like the ultimate client horror story. So those are some obvious ones. Other things I can think of that I really don't like with clients. This is a subtle one, but it's a really profoundly bad one. It's what I think of as dark KPIs. So let's say that a client comes to you and is like, I need a website, and it really needs to like handle our, online ordering system better than the current one. And then you start building them a website and they start telling you, they're haranguing you about the colors on the site and this, that, and the other. And, maybe there's some reason that they're doing that, but over the course of time, you're tasked with building something that efficiently processes orders, and they're getting on you about like irrelevant cosmetic concerns or whatever. Well, what's going on there is that there's something that they consider success that they haven't disclosed to you. So to me, a big source of annoyance is if a client comes and says they want help solving a problem, but then we are constructing solutions to that problem and they're bringing up irrelevancies that don't matter for the solution of the problem. I realize like, oh, there is something else here that's more important to you than what you've told me you want help with. And I don't have time for games like this. If we surface it and then reconnoiter and say, okay, well, there's more than one factor here, that's fine. I'm not demanding perfection and goals from clients when they come in. But if it's something like, well, I want to bring a lot of traffic to my site, and then the dark KPIs, I'm really scared of looking bad, so I'm going to throttle on anything that anyone is posting. It's kind of like, look, you have these incompatible goals and don't involve me in, kind of sorting out which of these two incompatible things you prefer. Like, this is kind of a waste of time. So that has tended to be the source of frustration in client projects. And usually it just kind of winds up in another, like, here's your money back. Good luck. At least in the content space. I'm trying to think if this has happened much in indie consulting. Yeah, usually my indie consulting gigs historically were, too short and high stakes for this kind of thing. Like, the discovery when I would, actually like fly out and go on site somewhere and help them for like a week, straight out their org chart or whatever. There was a lot of discovery up front before I actually got on a plane and went and did stuff with them. I guess another big one that leads to horror stories, and this would be true in indie land and with Hit Subscribe, is the thing I call outsourcing a miracle. So let's say a client comes to Hit Subscribe, or a client contact, and maybe it's somebody in the middle of the org chart, like a director of digital marketing, and they say, I need to get a lot of eyeballs on the site. Like, I want, to try to get 250,000 visitors over the next year. That kind of thing would require content at scale. You would need to create a lot of content to drive that many visitors. But then they explain that their CEO is very particular about what appears on the blog, and the CEO wants to read, review, comment on, discuss, and debate every single blog post. Now, I see this coming out in advance, and I say, whoa, whoa, whoa. You are tasked with something impossible, and you're trying to do something that, while smart, is not something I'm going to let myself be part of, which is you're trying to outsource this to a vendor. So either the vendor produces some kind of miracle, or you can throw them under the bus and say it's their fault that this thing that is obviously going to fail has failed. So when you are doing discovery and you are looking at clients, or prospects, I should say, that's a big thing to detect. Is, are they trying to bring you in to do something that they can't possibly execute? And it's not because they lack the expertise, it's because they're set up to fail. So don't let them outsource a failure to you. Don't let them outsource, creating a miracle to you. That's a big one that's going to lead to horror stories. Like, we just need somebody to like get this website up and running in the next 2 weeks. And, you realize that's an impossible task. Don't go into that and think like, oh, well, if I just show them I worked 24/7 and tried my best, they'll be happy. No, they won't. Don't do that. So I guess another way to say this is to make sure that whatever you're engaging is feasible and sustainable, that you can deliver it reasonably in the normal scope of your work. Gosh, another big one for me is obsession with like details and haggling and metrics. Haggling is a big one for me. This is another reason I got away from time and materials. I hate negotiating. I tend to actually be fairly good at it in a sense, but the reason I'm good at it isn't because I'm really good at negotiating. It's because if you circle back to the earlier part, I remain willing to blow up even the largest of details or deals over like, things that kind of annoy me. And that makes me good at things like, buying cars or whatever. If I get annoyed enough with the situation, I will leave. And then people flip around because they think it's maybe some kind of game. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But I think, again, ironically, the thing that makes me good at that is that I'm actually willing to blow up the deal. If I were like playing a game, it wouldn't really work. So like haggling and negotiating in zero sum fashion is annoying to me, but that doesn't come up very much with flat pricing, and especially with something like value pricing. It's like, let's identify a goal here. And as we're working to that goal, I'm going to try to do it for you in the most cost effective way possible. So there's nothing really to haggle over here. And not moving on price helps there too. So if you have, hopefully not your hourly rate, but if that's what it is, that's what it is. But if you have, your service offerings or whatever, don't negotiate on price. Just if they try to do that, say like, nah, it'll make your life easier in the long run, in my opinion. So that eliminates, one form of haggling, but like, details of scope or arguing over contracts, that's a big one for me. Nothing about that like rises to the level of horror stories, but I absolutely hate reading and marking up contracts. I hate like just details. Like I want to, the details matter when it comes to fulfillment and execution, but I want to engage with true north defined, let's bring, I'm trying to think like, let's get your $20 million agile transformation back on track. Or, these days, let's get you 500,000 visitors over the next 2 years, or, whatever the goal is. Let's set that true north. And then sure, we'll deal with the details as they come up, but not get lost in the weeds of them like at negotiation time, or even during an engagement, like, whoa, why are we arguing over the color of the font on your website? Like, the goal was to get you $1 million in orders next year, not to arrive at like the exact shade of goldenrod that's. So that's a big one for me. It could lead to horror stories. I thought as I talked through this, like some actual instances would come up, but not a whole lot did. I think if you really just remain not overly needy of any particular piece of business, maybe the lesson here is really that all of those things that seem like such a big deal as they're happening, and those have come up, there have certainly been moments where a client was unhappy with something, or I got into a contentious situation, but like, it's really just kind of an afterthought. It doesn't stay with me or haunt me. And I think really it all comes down to being picky about your business, making sure you don't need business, and diversifying enough so that you can walk away from things and not worry about it. Just adopt that life's too short mantra. Like, don't have nightmare horror stories. Just like, don't let it happen. Try to prevent it, get good at recognizing it coming, and don't allow it to happen. And then if you get into the middle of one shaping up, just snip. Like, no, I'm not going to let you become my nightmare over the next bunch of months. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's that. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I wish I could have provided a better personal anecdote. Maybe I just like kind of automatically flip into like generalizing and advice mode. I haven't done a lot of personal anecdotes on this channel. So if you were like looking for me to kind of conjure up some true whopper of a client horror story, I don't have that. You know what? Maybe I'll do sometime if anybody's interested and expresses interest. And I could tell you about some of the absolutely amazing war stories I have from assessing legacy code bases. That is something I can conjure up actual amazing stories about. So just let me know if you want to hear about the time that a guy built his own unit test framework to test data transfer objects, for instance, generate automated tests to do that. That was an interesting one. So I could tell stories like that all day, but client horror stories, not really. I just don't let people become, horrific in my life. So yeah, I will catch you all next time.